Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll just put it to a slideshow. Okay, does that work?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Flora, for the introduction. So today, Joanna and I are going to talk a little bit about Aptis. Because of the limited time, we'll be quite brief about it and then spend a little bit more time on the case study, right? Because we want to see how Aptis was used in a very interesting uh, project with the Singapore government, whereby we customized the test according to the needs of the client and then launched it earlier this year. All right, so I'll just briefly run you through the Aptis characteristics and features. I think Aptis is a relatively new test that the market for about 7 years. And at the beginning, our colleagues, the assessment experts within the British Council, felt that there was a need for a valid and reliable test. And very uniquely for a test at that time, it was benchmarked to the CEFR from the very beginning. Of course, the major tests nowadays, like TOEFL and IELTS, are all benchmarked with CEFR, but this was done after the tests were developed, right? But whereas for Aptis, this was done at the very beginning. And I think since then, since the beginning of the test 7 years ago, we've had more than 1.2 million people take it worldwide in 85 countries. And we're talking about government institutions, universities, educational institutions, as well as companies, right, firms. Okay, I'll move on. We can see here that Aptis has all the four major components of the English language, which are listening, writing, reading, and speaking. And on top of that, there's a compulsory grammar and vocabulary section. Right. The unique features of Aptis. I think the first thing is to note that Aptis is a very flexible test. Okay, so organizations can choose when, where, and which skills to test. Okay, so unlike tests like IELTS, whereby you need to take all four components, you can actually choose to take just one or two or three of the skills components. Aptis is a computer-delivered test, and you can test from one candidate up to 1,000, right? So it's really up to you. The locations are up to you as well, so you can test them on your premises or in our premises, or as we'll see later when I talk about Aptis Remote, in the comfort of your home or in the comfort of the candidate's home. All right, so Aptis can be delivered wholly by the British Council, in that we can set up the logistics for you, we can do the back-end admin, and we can send invigilators to your organization. But at the same time, you could choose the self-administered model, whereby you run all the steps by yourself. Speaking and writing are marked by human raters, and these are our trained examiners who are monitored under very strict standards. We can see here a sample of the candidate report that they will get after the test. The results are quite quick, right? So within 48 hours, and we can group them into individual or group reports. So I think even for the lay person, right, let's say an HR person in an organization, they can easily decipher the results, which are presented both in a numerical format as well as in a CEFR format. Okay, I'll move on. This slide talks about the uses of Aptis. So obviously the most obvious use of Aptis is to assess the English language skills of employees, teachers, and students. And then these results, as we saw in the previous slide, are benchmarked to the CEFR. Okay, but importantly as well, Aptis helps to identify the language training needs of the candidates, and then it will help organizations, especially schools, to curate their curriculum in an appropriate manner, right? So come up with appropriate training courses for the students who need them. So lots of our clients actually use Aptis as a reliable indicator, at the point of entrance or exit for the institution. So as admissions tests or as exit tests. Right. And this slide now shows the various variants of Aptis. Okay, I've been talking mostly about Aptis General, right, which is the test that we started out with. But then we quickly realized that there was a need on the market for more specific audiences. So we came up with Aptis for teachers and then Aptis for teens. And then a couple of years ago, we realized that there was a need for further differentiation, because if we look at the bottom of the slide, we can see that the first three, Aptis General, Teachers, and Teens, all test up to the C level on the CFR, but doesn't go beyond that. So we came up with Aptis Advanced and Aptis for Teens Advanced to distinguish between the C1 and C2 levels. All right. So I think we've got something for everyone, basically. Finally, I will talk a little bit about Aptis Remote. Aptis Remote is the same test essentially. The content and the questions are all the same as for general Aptis. And the main difference is that Aptis Remote can be delivered wherever the candidate is located. So for example, if they want to do it in the comfort of their home or in a remote location owned by the client, that's possible. I've mentioned that the test questions are exactly the same as for general Aptis, but what we have done for Aptis Remote is to enhance the security features, because obviously if the candidate is seated in the comfort of their home, they could do certain things which are not immediately visible. So we have come up with several features which enhance or at least maintain the security of the test. Okay, so on this slide we can see that that the candidates are scanned in terms of the ID documents and their face. So we do a face scan and ID scan before the test and on the day of the test. There's AI software that tracks eye movements, so it picks up any suspicious activity during the test. So the entire test is recorded, and the AI software kicks in when the recording starts, so that if the candidate is looking somewhere for a very long time, or they're looking below them, under the table, all these things are picked up and flagged to the administrator. All right, and at the end of the test, the administrator can go back and look at the recording, and if there's any suspicious behavior, we can contact the candidate to ask them what they were doing. Okay, this is the last slide that I've got. So I've talked about the face and ID verification. Just before the test starts, we ask the candidates to do a 360-degree room scan. So they are supposed to show what is in their immediate surroundings. The browser is locked, so they cannot access websites during the test. And as I mentioned earlier, the entire test is recorded, and suspected infractions are picked up and then investigated. Right, so that's a very quick introduction of Aptis and Aptis Remote. And I'll now pass over to Joanna to talk about how we customize and localize the test for a project in Singapore.
Thank you, Sharon, and I'll ask you to continue controlling the slides, and I'll wave at you when it's time, all right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that Sharon and I worked on extensively from late 2018 until we went live in January 2020, so January this year. It's a localization practice. So while Sharon says we have something for everyone in our range of Aptis tests, we can also take Aptis and adapt it for a specific client, for a specific candidature. And the one I'm talking about today is the workplace literacy and numeracy testing in Singapore. It's a project for the Singapore government to assess people's English language proficiency, but also their numeracy. And it's for access to workplace training and perhaps to tertiary education, Institute of Technical Education for people who didn't finish high school. The things that I'm picking up on today are not necessarily the technical aspects of the assessment that we did, but more about how the flexibility, the operational experience and the expertise that we have within the British Council, within global assessments, but also in our regional and local teams, we were able to bring those together to achieve a really good solution for our client. You can see there the British Council in Singapore, where I was based until just a couple of months ago. And that's the flagship, I guess, of this WPLN assessments is in that building there. Wait. So in the flexible delivery options, Sharon's already said that we can offer multiple skill packages in Aptis. So it was really important in this solution that we were able to offer just reading perhaps, or reading and listening, or even up to, in the WPLN, 5 skills, because numeracy is included. What was really important there was we were managing a transition. There had been a workplace literacy and numeracy assessment regime in place for about 15 years, and that was being phased out, and the British Council was taking over. So it was important that we were able to meet the client's needs in terms of multiple skill packages and that sort of flexibility of delivery, so that what was available before the change was available after the change. In terms of location and flexible delivery, the WPLN is delivered at Napier Road in our own managed test centre, at Paya Lebar, which is on the other side of the city, or in the client's invigilated locations. So for some of our candidates in the WPLN, they can't make it to a test centre for various reasons, or it's easier for their institution if the test is delivered within their institution. So that flexibility of delivery is really useful in this solution. Along with that, some of our candidature are candidates with disabilities. They're in the special schools in Singapore. So we've been able to build into the WPLN the kind of EDI accommodations that we have in Aptis. For example, if a candidate has cognitive processing issues, we can apply extra time to their test. If they have visual impairment, we can offer a Braille test or a supersized test so that they can do it on a pen and paper version, or even within the platform, there are opportunities to zoom in to questions to be able to see them more clearly. The final point there is that the listening and speaking audio files were localized for the Singapore WPLN. That means that I spent a lot of time in a recording studio, and we changed from the originator audio files, which were UK English, to Singapore accent English. I'll be talking more about that later on in about 2 hours' time. If you'd like to join and know more about that, go to the next one. In terms of operations, I came into this role from very much an academic perspective. As Flora mentioned, I was researching and teaching applied linguistics. I did not know how many operational details there were or that go into delivering language assessments. So in this particular solution, Sharon led on this, the development of a registration and payment portal. Also, the results are accessed through that portal, and candidates can pay online using an online e-nets, or they can also access what's called a Skills Future credit, so a government-supported payment for that WPLN assessment. Now, our candidature in this test are quite low education, so some of them have a lot of trouble doing the online registration or accessing the payment. So we also have a customer service support line, which is usually accessed over the phone. But if candidates can't make things work with that over the phone support, they can even come into Napier Road for support with their registration problems. As Shayran said, we do invigilation, we have test centres, we have dedicated test rooms over 2 locations where everything is set up. The computers, the screen, the invigilation is there, and it's a full experience that the British Council delivers there. And then finally, the results come through. And as Shayran mentioned, we have the Aptis examiner team, which looks after the results for the writing and the speaking. And if you were in Luke Harding's session earlier today, you would have heard him talk about the benefits for validity for the human rating of writing and speaking, and the construct being much broader if you have human marking. And I think this is one really important part of Aptis that people perhaps don't understand. Shayran, do you want to jump on? And the final thing is that when we did this, you remember me saying that we were replacing an existing set of assessments. What was really important for the client, and indeed for all of the stakeholders in the WPLN localisation, was that the scores from before the British Council had the same meaning as the scores with the British Council. So we worked with Dr. Jamie Donnelly, who's part of the British Council Assessment Research Group, and with other colleagues in the Assessment Research Group to work on the standard setting, which means how we linked Aptis, which was now WPLN because we'd re-recorded and things like that, how we linked that to the existing WPLN framework so that we were confident that a candidate with scores from before had the same meaning after the British Council took over the delivery of the WPLN assessment suite. The other work that we did that was really important and links to having this expertise in exams is the idea of working for positive washback. So not only was it important for the stakeholders to understand that scores before and scores after meant the same thing, but also that the stakeholders understood what the scores mean and what the construct is that we're trying to assess in the WPLN. So we did a lot of training for the training providers, the people who do literacy and numeracy training in Singapore, and for the score users. So these are things like the real estate industry or the taxi driver organization or the bus driver organization, so that they can understand what a WPLN 5, for example, means. And then finally, we're continuing to watch what's happening with this localization. So for example, the presentation I'll be doing later today is part of ongoing test performance review, making sure that the tests are doing the right thing, that the assessments are still valid and that they're reliable. We're also really interested in what's the impact of changing these assessments? Are they going to have an impact on teaching and learning in Singapore in these literacy and numeracy classes? Because quite often institutions and governments decide to change tests because they want to change behaviour. So we're very interested to see if this change of assessment suite has had an impact on learner and teacher behaviour. That's the end of me. I'm just wondering if there are any questions for Shayran or myself.
Hi, Joanna, Flora here. So I just encourage the participants to feel free to post their questions or comments in the chat boxes here. So seems that's quite clear. And everybody, if you have any questions, so you can contact the speakers and check their emails on the screen.
Hi, Evie. That's a great question. I think, sorry, two questions there. There's one from Cheryl, which is an easy one to answer. Our initial contract is for 3 years to deliver the WPLN assessment, but we are hoping that we'll be there for longer than that. To EB, observing the impact on teaching, one of the big differences between the old assessments and the new assessments is the new assessments are based on the CEFR and based on the idea of having a look at what candidates can do. So we want to encourage the students or the candidates when they come in and take the test to demonstrate to the examiners what they can do, what kind of functions they can complete, communicative functions they can complete in speaking and in writing. So we're hoping that there's some positive washback into the classroom from that, in that the training providers, when they're preparing candidates for the test, that they encourage or they teach the learners, you know, how to use language and how to use language to get things done. That's our hope, and I think, without going too far, that was also the client's interest as well, that there was a hope that introducing the new assessments could push a bit of a shift towards a more communicative approach in the classroom and a focus on what candidates can do. So EB, does that answer your question? Great, thank you. Cheryl, that's another good question. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to work with training providers doing some classroom observation. We're actually hoping that we'll be able to engage teaching centre staff from the British Council in Singapore to work on some mini projects where they can do sort of small washback style studies, looking at learner behaviour, looking at teacher behaviour, perhaps doing some curriculum review, because each of the training providers had to develop new curriculum as a response to the new assessments. So we're sure that there is impact on what's happening in the classroom. We do, however, have to collect good evidence to be able to make those claims. But we know that there are changes happening, and there are changes in the training providers as well. They're also government appointed, and with the new assessments came new appointments on the training provider side as well. One thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about working for positive washback is that we also published familiarization tests on our website. So if you're interested in looking at the WPLN and you're interested in listening to Singapore accent tests of listening, you could have a look at britishcouncil.org.sg, and then under the tab Take an Exam, it's the second, IELTS is at the top, and then the second one down is Workplace Literacy and Numeracy. And if you click on there, you can get through to the familiarization tests for all of the literacy components, and there's also a numeracy familiarization test there. Sharon, did I miss anything?
No, I think you've covered everything. Flora, I wonder if we are at the end of the session.
I'd say also, because I can't help myself, thank you for the opportunity to share, but also that the WPLN is a really interesting example of an institution, Skills Future Singapore, using a language test perhaps to make some change in teaching and learning. And we'll be talking tomorrow at the final panel, panel 2, about different ways that institutions and governments have used language tests to for change, basically. It's called The Power of Tests, the panel, and I'll be hosting it. And I have some amazing speakers, very, very exciting. So if you'd like to join, I think you should, really think you should join that. There'll be a lot of learning and some really impressive projects being talked about. Thanks. Thank you, Flora.
Okay, thank you, Flora.